Crispin, The Cross of Lead, chapters 41 through 45.
How long will that be? Soon. Can you be certain? It's all the talk of London, Bear said, as well as the court at Westminster. And who will succeed to the throne? Said John Ball. It could be his son, the Duke of Lancaster, the most hated man in England. That would help us. But the true heir, Bear went on, is the king's grandson, Richard of Bordeaux. The child? Said John Ball. Better yet, that would bring even greater weakness. Why do you think this is the proper time for an uprising in these parts? I heard Bear ask. Lord Furnival is dead, said John Ball. There is already much confusion. Lady Furnival has summoned all the authorities from his manors. With no known heirs, she is vulnerable. Now, listen to me, John Ball, Bear said. It's not for me to tell you how to act, but if we are to talk of Furnival's heirs, in my travels, I discovered something of great importance. He spoke so low that his words became indistinct, but I had heard enough. I drew back up the stairs. That Bear was engaged in rebellion of some sort I could not doubt. In Stromford, mere talk of such things was considered a hanging offence. What would happen if Bear were caught? It seemed, moreover, that he was not just a juggler, but some kind of spy. As I lay on the pallet, I tossed and turned until I finally decided it was air I needed. Getting up, I poked the shuttered window open a little way, then glanced down upon the street. At first I thought it was deserted. Then across the way I saw a figure standing in the shadow of an overhanging building. I thought of going down the steps and telling Bear. Instead, I held back. This time I would stay put as I'd been told. As I lay back on the hay, I was determined to remain awake until Bear returned, so I could tell him what I'd seen. But the day had been long and tumultuous. Despite my intentions, I fell asleep. Please stop here and answer question 2. Chapter 42. I woke the next morning to the deafening peal of bells. They were so loud, so tumultuous. For a brief moment I thought the day of judgment had arrived. Then I remembered. I was in the town of Great Wexley, with its many churches, and it was the feast of St. John the Baptist. Even so, it was strange to waken in so closed a space, the air stale, the only light being that which slipped through the cracks in the shuttered window. But the pain in my wrist had gone, with only a blue mark to remind me of the attack. I turned to Bear, wanting to tell him about the man I'd seen outside the tavern the night before. but he, taking up most of the space on the pallet, remained asleep. To amuse myself, I plucked fleas from the straw and crushed them between my fingers. When Bear still didn't wake, I grew restless and crept out of the room, making my way down the steps to the inn's main floor. Halfway down I stopped. The smell of wine was ripe and blended into the more embracing warmth of new-baked bread. Through the open door bright light streamed in. The rain had ceased. The tavern room was crowded. There were tradesmen as well as peasants, men in livery, and here and there a woman. Most people were dressed in dark and rough brown clothing, but some were very elegant in bright colors and fur trim. Midst the cloak and hoods were hats of more variety than I could reckon. People ate by dipping large chunks of bread into bowls of wine, stuffing themselves and hurrying away. The talk, loud and spoken quickly, went faster than my ear could catch. What I grasped seemed mostly about the day's market, and that it was a glorious day. Presiding over all was Widow Daventry, louder to my ears than all the people combined. She fairly threw down loaves and bowls of drink on the tables, now and again buffeting men with her fists or exchanging insults with a boisterous tongue. Even as she put coins in her purse, the bread costing a penny, the wine the same. As I watched, more people came in, sat, and ate. Midst the swarm of people, many dogs wandered. I even saw a pig snuffling up what had fallen to the ground. No one appeared to notice or even care. At one point, I noticed a young man enter and stand in the threshold, casting his eye about the crowd. I say "I" because I instantly recognized him as the one-eyed man we had seen in the first town which Bear and I had performed. I immediately backed up some steps. His survey, however, was brief, for he turned and went. I recalled Bear saying people would come a great distance for the market day. Even so, I asked myself if it was merely accidental that he had come to the Green Man's door. Could he be in search of me? Or Bear? Please stop here and answer question 3. I hastened up to our room to tell Bear that he was still asleep. Reluctant to wake him, I returned to the steps to stay on guard. But as I sat there, I found it impossible to escape the sensation that something dangerous was drawing in upon to us. It put me to mind of the snares Bear used to catch the birds we ate, an unseen loop pulled tight until the unsuspecting birds were caught. Perhaps we now were those birds. Please stop here and answer question 4. Chapter 43. I had been sitting for I don't know how long when Widow Daventry noticed me. For a moment she stared at me as if she had not seen me before. "You there, boy!" she called, avoiding my name, though she knew it perfectly well. "You're supposed to be in the kitchen." Taken by surprise, for I was sure I hadn't been told I belonged there, I made no protest, but came down the steps. In haste, she took me by an arm and led me away. Though one or two of the men called out, asking who I was, she did not answer. "Where's Bear?" she asked when we entered the back room. "Asleep." "You mustn't be seen," she said. He should have told you." I made no reply, assuming Bear had told her of the attack on me and that she felt a need to protect me. If Bear trusted her, I told myself, so should I. I looked about. We were in a kitchen filled with food. On one side stood great barrels. From the smell of them, they contained wine or ale. Against another wall was a brick oven. There were shelves upon the walls where loaves of bread and trenchers lay. They smelled like bliss itself, enough to make my mouth water. "Make sure the pies in the oven don't burn," the woman told me, handing me a long shovel-like wooden tool. "Place the done ones there," she said, pointing to the shelf. "There are breads ready to bake in there," she added, indicating a wooden chest. Then she bustled out, but not before saying firmly, "And stay in here." Please stop here and answer question 5. I peeked into the oven where the pies were baking. With the tool I'd been given, I reached in and fetched out some. Seeing that they were not so brown as those on the shelves, I returned them to the heat. While waiting, now and again adding more wood to the oven fire, I looked about me, amazed anew at the quantities of food I saw. Dangling from a ceiling hook was a piece of meat as large as I had ever seen, spotted thickly with flies. Bunches of herbs, I recognized parsley, sage, and rosemary, hung from the ceiling, as did onions and leeks. Turnips and cabbages sat on shelves. Bushels of grain were there. There were clay jars and bowls aplenty, filled with I knew not what. Everything had a different smell, some pleasing, others not. After a while I rechecked the oven. The pies were now uniformly brown. In haste I slid them out and attempted to place them on the shelves with the others, but all scorching my hand. One was so hot it slipped from my fingers and fell to the ground, where it broke open. In a panic I scooped up the pieces and tried to push them together. When the bits failed to stay, I looked for a place to hide the damage, but finding none, I simply ate it, bolting the pieces like a hungry dog. Despite my nervousness and the speed with which I ate, I could hardly believe how rich and fine it tasted, filled with savory things I had never eaten and could not name. What's more, being hot from the oven, it filled me with a pleasing warmth. Please stop here and answer question 6. Widow Daventry bustled in. Have you taken the pies out? Feeling guilty, I said, I put them on the shelf. She considered them, then me. Except for the one you ate, she said. She opened a wooden chest and took up 5 unbaked loaves of bread. Bake these, she said, but eat no more, she admonished before hurrying out. Embarrassed, I did as I'd been told, being much more careful this time. Still, I confess, the memory of the goodness lingered for a long time in my mouth. After a while, Widow Daventry returned. Now, come with me, she said, and led me into the tavern room. It was empty of her customers. What remained were scraps of bread upon the floor and mostly empty tankards on the tables. Gather up the tankards, she commanded, and bring them to me. I did as it was told. She took them, sloshing out what remained onto the floor. We worked in silence. She seemed tense. But then, as if she'd been thinking the matter over for some time, she said, Crispin, I'm sorry for your troubles, but if ever a boy could find a good master, you've found him in Bear. As God is merciful, keep him close to his true calling, his juggling and his music. Don't let him mingle too much with those who would cause trouble, because, she looked at me as if I knew something I didn't, if you don't help him, things could go much the worse for you both. Please stop here and answer question 7. Chapter 44. When Bear finally appeared, he fairly stumbled down the steps, bawling for his breakfast. He had not put on his split hat. Crispin, he said when he saw me standing there, broom in hand. With the widow demanding 2 pennies a day for our keep, it's good to see you working. Where is the good dame? In the kitchen. Be so kind as to fetch her. When I did, she had me carry in 2 of her meat pies, plus a tankard of ale, which I set before Bear. Ah, widow, he said with a grin, I'm glad the boy is toiling on our bill. For the love of Christ, all need to work honestly for their bread. And I trust you will too, she said. So I shall, he said, hand to his heart. Except this morning, I've things to which I must attend. Now, I don't want this boy out upon the town again. It will be a mercy if you keep him busy and so reduce our debt. Can you? Widow Daventry, who didn't look too pleased, wiped her hands on her vest. There's always work in the kitchen. Just join me when he's done, she said to me and started from the room. At the doorway, she paused. Are you meeting with John Ball again? She asked. Widow, Bear returned severely with a glance at me. Less said, less to deny. She glared, but left us alone. Crispin, Bear said to me between bites of food and swallows of drink as I stood opposite him. Beyond what she tells you to do, you need to attend to your music. Practice in our room. Otherwise, your sinful caterwauling will turn aside her trade. Now, he said, speaking softer so only I might hear, after none, when my business is over, you and I shall leave Great Wexley. I want that too, I said, much relieved. But can't I go with you this morning? It's of no concern to yours. In any case, you'll be safer here. I think someone's spying on us, I said. Explain yourself. Do you remember the first village we performed in? You teased a one-eyed man. Did I? How? You made him angry when you toyed with his mazer. What's more, he followed us into their church. He listened when the priest told you about the boy who killed Father Quinnell, and when there was talk of the reward money, he looked at me closely. And remember You said we'd be here this day." "You've been observant," said Bear, attending mostly to his food. "But what of it?" "That same young man came to the door. He looked around and went away." "Are you sure?" I nodded. "Did he see you?" "I don't think so." Bear frowned. "If he's a spy, he's a clumsy one. If he's after you, we don't need to worry. My business will be quickly done. You'll stay here and keep out of sight. Then we'll go." "But, Bear, I think I saw someone across the alley last night, too." "The same person?" "I couldn't tell." "Crispin," he said, "for one so unwilling to see the world when we first met, perhaps you notice too much now." "You've been protecting me," I said. "Maybe I should be protecting you." Please stop here and answer question 8. Bear looked around at me and grinned. "I like the thought. When I'm an old man, I'll remind you of it. But for now, be easy." When Bear had fairly stuffed himself with food and drunk down the remainder of his ale in one great gulp, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and rose up. "Remember," he said, "this time you must stay here." Then, without any further words, he left. I followed him out of the front door and saw him stride through the crowded streets. Just to see him go off made me nervous, and sure enough, as Bear moved through the crowd, I observed the one-eyed man step out onto the street and look after him. He was not alone. A man dressed in the blue and gold livery of Lord Furnival's house was with him. What's more, the one-eyed man pointed in the direction Bear had taken. I could have no doubt. The young man was after Bear, not me. Even so, when the one-eyed man turned in my direction, I quickly ducked inside. What he might have done, I didn't know, because I raced down the hall to the back door and leapt out onto the alley and began to run. As soon as opportunity allowed, I went onto the main street and ran in the direction Bear had gone. I had to warn him. Please stop here and answer question 9. Chapter 45. I caught sight of Bear almost immediately. As he was so tall, his bald head all but gleaming, it was easy to follow him as he moved along the main street. Though his long strides kept him beyond my reach, I could follow without being observed. It being the feast of St. John the Baptist, market day, the streets of Great Wexley were crammed with even more people than the day before. Every alley and lane was filled. The noise was deafening. I, who had every reason to stay unnoticed, was grateful for the crowds, and more so when I saw soldiers. Whether they were looking for me or Bear or just keeping order, I don't know. I only knew I must avoid them. Perhaps Bear saw them too, for now he plunged down a narrow side alley. I followed. Here my pursuit proved harder, for he moved faster than before, turning this way and that, almost as if he knew I might be on his heels. Once, twice, I thought I lost him. Fortunately, his great height always gave him away. He had gone on in this fashion for some time when I saw him duck into a building. It was a large timbered structure, 3 stories high, the second and third levels leaning far over the alley upon which it faced. On the first, street level, was a large shuttered window. Over the door hung a board upon which an image of a boot had been painted. By this I took it to mean that boots and shoes were made and sold there. At first I hung back, keeping my eyes on the door to see if Bear would re-emerge. He didn't. But a few other men went in, some of them, I thought, looking furtively about as they entered. It was as if they, too, feared being noticed. Nervous that Bear would be annoyed with me for disobeying his orders a second time, I decided not to go to him, but remained on watch, my eyes alert for either the one-eyed man, soldiers, or men in blue and gold livery. But though the alleyway was full of passers-by, I saw no one that gave me any reason for concern. I was about to move on, with the thought of peeking through cracks in the building's front shutter, when another man appeared. A short man. He had a great dark cloak about him, hiding whatever clothes he wore. The hood concealed his hair. He, too, looked about, as if to make certain no one saw what he did. Then he entered the house. It was John Ball. There could be no more doubt that this was more of Bear's dangerous business, from which he had warned me to keep away. I had little doubt I'd not be welcomed if he discovered I was close. Even so, my curiosity held me. As I passed the building, I discovered a narrow passageway running by its farther side. Pausing, I looked about to make sure I was not being observed, then slipped within it. The passageway was narrow, but I easily made my way until I faced a rough stone wall. Having gone so far, I decided to climb it. From the top of the wall, I peered down into a small garden of flowers and herbs. The garden was surrounded by 3 walls built of tough stone, the others 2 not being much higher than the one I'd just climbed. The back of the house served as the 4th wall. The place was deserted. I dropped down into it. Facing the rear of the building, I now discovered a back door had been left partially opened. I started to move toward it, only to be arrested by the sound of a passionate voice which said, "That no man, or woman either, shall be enslaved, but stand free and equal to one another. That all fees, obligations, and manorial rights be abolished immediately. That land must be given freely to all with a rent of no more than 4 pennies per acre per year. Unfair taxes must be abolished. Instead of petty tyrants, all laws shall be made by the consent of a general commons of all true and righteous men. Above all persons, our lawful king shall truly reign, but no privileged or corrupt parliaments or councillors. The church, as it exists, should be allowed to wither. Corrupt priests and bishops must be expelled from our churches. In their place will stand true and holy priests, who shall have no wealth or rights above the common man." The more I listened, the more startled I was that I understood what John Ball was saying, that he was in fact describing the way I had lived, and how it was wrong and could be made right. But as his words went on, I realized too how hazardous this business truly was, nothing less than rebellion against the realm of England. Please stop here and answer question 10. Backing away from the door, I managed to climb the wall and move hurriedly along the narrow alley toward the street. My intent was to return to the inn, there to await Bear in our departure from Great Wexley. Before stepping from the passage between the buildings, I took the precaution of looking up and down the passageway to see if I was being observed, which is how I spied a group of soldiers coming toward me along the street. They were such as I had seen by the town walls, armor on their chests and rusty metal caps on their heads. Broadswords were in their hands, daggers were at their hips. They were being led by a man who wore a vest of chainmail over a quilted blue jacket. In his hands he carried a crossbow. His helmet bore a crest of blue and gold, but I knew him as John Aycliffe. By his side was the one-eyed man. Please stop here and answer question 11.